I knew something was off the moment I heard metallic clanking outside my kitchen window. Our neighborhood's usually dead quiet on Thursday mornings unless someone's mower backfires. But this was louder, rhythmic, aggressive. I stepped onto my back porch and froze. Two guys in orange vests were yanking at the posts of my 6-foot privacy fence like it was some kind of demolition derby. One was already halfway through pulling out the third panel. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, stomping down the steps. The taller guy, clearly not expecting to be caught mid-crime, dropped his crowbar and looked up. We were told to remove the fence. HOA directive." "By who?" I demanded. He pointed toward the end of my driveway, and there she stood. Sylvia Thompson, in full HOA regalia, clipboard, pastel cardigan, and that always judgy face like she just smelled something sour. "The Queen Karen of Willow Creek Estates." "I gave the order, Marshal," she said, walking toward me like she owned the earth under her feet. "Your fence is encroaching on common property. It violates Section 12, Line 3 of the bylaws. It has to go." "You didn't give me any notice. No letter, no call, not even a sticky note," I snapped. "And this fence has been here for 6 years. I built it myself." "With permits." "That's irrelevant now. We've updated the plat lines," she said, tilting her head like she was being patient with a toddler. "We did a new survey and your fence is over the boundary." "Where's the survey?" "It's internal HOA documentation," she said, then turned to the workers. "Keep going. You so much as pull one more nail and I swear I'll sue you and the HOA," I said, stepping between the fence and the workers. Sylvia's smile dropped like a stone. "You're being unreasonable, Marshal. You can't stop us from enforcing community standards." "Watch me," I said, pulling out my phone. "And while you're at it, you might want to read up on property laws in this state." She rolled her eyes and stomped off like she had better things to do, but I could tell she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That night, I dug through my garage until I found the original survey from when I bought the house. My property line was clearly marked. The fence wasn't over anything, it was well within my boundary, and I still had the city permits to prove it. I took photos of everything, scanned the documents, and backed them up in 3 places. Then I called up an old friend, Nalan, a real estate attorney who owed me big from our college days. After I explained what happened, he laughed. "Marshal, if they try to remove that fence again, you'll own their next HOA meeting hall." I didn't sleep much that night. I set up cameras around the yard, motion sensors, the whole works. Something told me Sylvia wasn't the type to back off just because she got caught, and I was right. The next morning, I was halfway through my coffee when a loud knock rattled my front door. Not the usual UPS tap. This was impatient, heavy like someone wanted to punch the door down but remembered they were wearing loafers. I opened it to find a uniformed man in his late 50s, gray mustache, sun-baked skin, and a badge that read Code Enforcement City Zoning Division. Next to him stood a nervous woman holding a clipboard and avoiding eye contact. "You Marshal Grant?" the man asked, adjusting his belt like he was settling in for a long day. "Yeah, what's this about? We received a complaint that you've erected a fence on municipal property. We're here to investigate." My teeth clenched. "Let me guess, Sylvia Thompson." He didn't answer. The woman glanced at her clipboard, then muttered, "Complaint submitted by the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. No individual name listed." "Of course not," I said, stepping aside. "Come on, let's look." We walked the perimeter. As they examined the posts, I pulled out the permit folder I'd used the night before. I handed it to the woman, who blinked like she hadn't expected pushback. "Official city permits, dated 6 years ago," I said. "Survey included, fence is within the legal setback. If the HOA's got new lines, they're private, not city-sanctioned." The officer flipped through the pages, grunted, and turned to his colleague. "You see anything that contradicts this?" She shook her head. "Nope. Everything checks out." He handed the file back and gave me a nod, which for a city official is basically a standing ovation. "You're good. If they try this again, document it and give us a call. As they left, I spotted Sylvia halfway down the street, pretending to inspect a neighbor's flower bed. I didn't say a word, I just gave her the kind of look that says, "Try me again and you'll regret it." But I knew she wasn't done. And I was right again. That evening, Nolan called. He'd been digging into the HOA's filings and found something interesting. "They filed a new plat map with the county clerk 2 months ago," he said. "But here's the kicker, the map was never approved. They submitted it, but the county flagged it for inconsistencies and kicked it back. It's not valid." "So they're using a fake boundary map," I said, "not fake. Just not legal. It's like trying to collect rent on a monopoly board. They've been citing it in internal memos and HOA emails, but it holds no authority." That's when I decided it was time to stop playing defense. I compiled a formal complaint to the city attorney's office, attaching copies of the invalid plat map, the permit records, and a timeline of the unauthorized fence removal attempt. I also included a notarized affidavit describing the incident, with photos from my security cameras showing the workers wrenching out fence posts and Sylvia standing there like she was overseeing a land grab. Less than 2 days later, a city investigator named Monica Ramirez showed up at my door. She was sharp-eyed, mid-30s, carried herself like someone who didn't waste time on nonsense. "I reviewed your complaint," she said. "We're opening an inquiry into HOA misconduct. If they submitted altered or misleading documents to a public office, that's a Class C misdemeanor. Potentially worse if they caused property damage." I took her around back to show the section of fence still lying on the grass. One post had been splintered when the workers yanked it out. Monica photographed everything, even measured distances from the stakes I'd marked with surveyor's flags. "I'll be interviewing the HOA president tomorrow," she said. "If she can't produce an approved plat map, this could escalate quickly." The following week was quiet. Too quiet. Then on Friday I found a letter taped to my front door, not mailed, no postage, just taped like a ransom note. It was a final notice of violation, citing me for erecting a non-compliant structure on HOA property and demanding I pay a $5,000 fine within 10 days or face legal action. No signature. Just a rubber stamp that said Willow Creek Estates Compliance Committee. I brought it straight to Nolan. "This is garbage," he said. "They can't fine you for something they have no legal authority over, and taping threats to your door. That crosses into harassment." We drafted a cease and desist letter served by a process server that same day, but I didn't stop there. I filed a civil claim in county court for property damage, trespassing, and harassment. Total damages: $50,000, including punitive compensation for the fence destruction and the false violation notice. I named the HOA as the defendant, along with Sylvia Thompson, personally since she directed the removal. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. Word spread fast. Turns out, I wasn't the only one Sylvia had targeted. A retired couple down the block came forward with their own horror story. Sylvia had once threatened to tow their RV trailer even though it was parked on their driveway, claiming it ruined neighborhood aesthetics. Another neighbor, a single mom, said she'd been fined for having excessive garden gnomes. By the time the court hearing rolled around, a crowd had gathered outside the courthouse. Local news caught wind, and a reporter from Channel 9 was filming interviews on the steps. Sylvia showed up with a lawyer who looked like he hadn't read the case file until breakfast. Inside, Judge Leland, an older man with wild eyebrows and zero tolerance for theatrics, called the room to order. Nolan presented our evidence in calm, methodical layers. The original survey, the valid permits, the invalid plat map, the footage of fence removal, and the threatening letter. Sylvia's attorney argued that the HOA acted in good faith based on updated property records. But when Judge Leland asked for a copy of those updated records, the lawyer fumbled, then admitted he hadn't brought them. "I'm not interested in stories," the judge said. "I want documents. You don't have them, you don't have a case." We won the suit every single count. The judge ordered the HOA to pay $50,000 in damages, plus court fees. He also referred the matter to the state's Department of Regulatory Agencies for potential licensing violations. After the verdict, Sylvia tried to slink out the side exit, but the Channel 9 reporter caught her on camera. She muttered something about miscommunications and being misunderstood by the community. The following week, a petition to remove her from the HOA board circulated through the neighborhood. It needed 50 signatures. It got over 120 in 2 days. By the end of the month, Sylvia was out. A new board was voted in, one that actually listened to residents instead of ruling them like medieval tyrants. As for my fence, I rebuilt the section they tore down, this time with reinforced posts and a discreet motion-triggered spotlight. Just in case anyone got ideas. But no one did. Funny how quiet a neighborhood gets once the bully's been dethroned. 3 weeks after the court ruling, I was finally able to mow my lawn without feeling like I was being watched. The neighborhood felt different, not just quieter, but lighter, like someone had opened a window in a room that had been sealed too long. Sylvia's resignation had been swift and unceremonious. No farewell message, no apology. Just a terse announcement posted on the HOA bulletin board that she was stepping down for personal reasons. But I wasn't naive enough to think the rot stopped with her. A few days later, I was in my garage organizing tools when I heard footsteps approaching on the gravel. I turned to see Barry Tran, our new HOA president, standing at the edge of the driveway. He looked exhausted but approachable, carrying a manila folder under his arm. "Got a minute?" he asked. I nodded and opened the side door to the garage. We sat on a pair of folding chairs next to my workbench. "I've been going through the HOA's internal records," Barry said, laying the folder on his lap. "You should see what she left behind." He pulled out a stack of printed emails and spreadsheets. Sylvia had been issuing fines without board approval for years. She'd even created a set of fast-track violation slips that bypassed the formal warning process. Signed them herself, stamped them with the HOA seal. I leafed through one of the violation slips. The name on it jumped out at me: Mrs. Landry, the widow who lived 2 streets over. The fine: $300 for non-uniform mailbox paint. "That wasn't even voted on?" I asked. "Nope, and it gets worse." He reached into the folder again and pulled out a color-coded budget report. She rerouted over $12,000 from the maintenance fund into a line marked Community Aesthetic Adjustments. No invoices, no receipts, just vague memos about improvements. I stared at the numbers, then back at Barry. "You think she pocketed it?" "I don't know yet. But we're getting an audit, full forensic." That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were just starting to unravel. I knew Sylvia had been power-hungry, but this was organized, strategic. And it wasn't the kind of thing that could have gone unnoticed unless someone or several someones had been helping her. The next day, Barry called again. "She had access to our digital key fob logs," he said. "Every time a resident used the clubhouse or pool, it was logged on the server. But the logs are missing for the last 2 years. They delete automatically?" "Nope. Someone purged them manually, and only the logs, not the backups. Whoever did it had to know the system inside and out." That's when I remembered something. 6 months earlier, during a block cookout, Sylvia had been bragging to a group of residents about having eyes everywhere. At the time, I'd thought it was just her usual nosy flair. But now I wondered. I reached out to Nolan again. He connected me with a private tech investigator named Delia who specialized in data recovery and cyber audits. She was ex-military, no nonsense, and wore a smartwatch that buzzed every 3 minutes like clockwork. Within 48 hours, she'd recovered fragments of the deleted key fob logs enough to establish a pattern. They were using the logs to monitor residents' movements, Delia said during our second meeting. Anyone who spoke up at board meetings or challenged a violation. Their clubhouse access would suddenly get revoked, pool codes would stop working, it was targeted. "You're kidding," she pointed to a reconstructed log. Here, this resident Markle Sanders, he filed a complaint about a fine. 2 days later, his access was disabled. No notice. No reason. I sat back in my chair. That's not just abuse of power. That's surveillance, Delia nodded. And illegal under HOA data privacy laws in this state, especially if they didn't disclose it in the bylaws. Barry brought the findings to the rest of the new board that weekend. They voted unanimously to file a police report. By the following Tuesday, 2 plainclothes detectives visited the HOA office. They seized the desktop computer, several boxes of records, and a locked drawer that contained a flash drive labeled Board Records Private. That same evening, a patrol car parked outside Sylvia's house. She didn't come to the door. But the officers left with several black binders and her personal laptop. News traveled fast again. But this time, it wasn't just the local station. A regional paper ran an article headlined "Former HOA President Under Investigation for Financial Misconduct, Unauthorized Surveillance." My phone buzzed with messages from neighbors I barely knew, thanking me for starting the avalanche. Later that week, the police released a preliminary statement. Sylvia was being investigated for misappropriation of HOA funds, unlawful access to private data, and potential wire fraud. They were also looking into multiple individuals who may have assisted her. That's when I started noticing strange things. First, a white SUV kept circling my block, always driving slowly past my house, never stopping. Then my trash cans were mysteriously overturned 2 mornings in a row, only mine, not anyone else's on the street. One night, I found a screw jammed into the tread of my back tire. I installed more cameras, higher resolution, with night vision and license plate recognition. The footage caught someone in a hoodie walking up my driveway at 2 in the morning, looking straight at the camera, then walking away. Barry called the next day. "You're not going to believe this." Sylvia's cousin. He was the HOA's IT consultant for 3 years. Guess who had admin access to the security cameras around the clubhouse and pool? Let me guess, he's one of the multiple individuals. Bingo. And the police are closing in. 2 weeks later, charges were filed, official, public, and damning. Sylvia was charged with embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and unlawful electronic surveillance. Her cousin was charged with aiding and abetting in data manipulation. 2 former board members were named as co-conspirators for knowingly signing off on false budget reports. The HOA filed an insurance claim to cover part of the lost funds, but the deductible was high. So a special community meeting was called this time, open to all residents, no RSVP required. It was standing room only. Barry stood at the front beside a new treasurer and legal counsel. He didn't hold a clipboard, he didn't raise his voice. He just laid out the facts, the audit, the charges, the plan to rebuild trust. Then he turned to me. "Marshall Grant did more than defend his fence," he said. "He defended this entire community from being ruled by fear and deception, and he did it with receipts, literally." There was a long pause, then someone clapped, then another. Then the whole room joined in. It was surreal. I never wanted to be the center of attention, but in that moment, it felt like the neighborhood was exhaling together. Afterward, people came up to shake my hand. Mrs. Landry brought me a pie. Markle offered to help repaint the damaged fence section. Even the single mom with the garden gnome collection gave me a thumbs up. No one mentioned Sylvia again. Her house went up for sale a month later. The listing didn't mention the HOA history. As for me, I finally emptied the last box in my garage, hung the last tool on the pegboard. And for the first time in a long while, I looked out over my backyard not with suspicion but with peace. The fence stood firm, reinforced, legal and untouched, just like it should be. 3 months passed, and the neighborhood was finally starting to resemble what it was always meant to be: quiet, respectful, and just boring enough to be peaceful. The newly elected HOA board functioned without drama. Emails were transparent. Meetings were held outside the clubhouse with folding chairs and lemonade. People showed up now voluntarily. I thought we were done. Then Barry called again. "This isn't just about budget fraud," he said, voice low, like he was afraid someone might be listening. "I got a call from the city's legal department. They uncovered something bigger. I need you to come by the office." I met him the next morning. The HOA office had been relocated to a corner unit in the community center, less symbolic, less fortress-like. Barry was seated at the folding desk, surrounded by manila folders and a laptop with an external drive plugged in. He turned the screen toward me. A spreadsheet was open. Dates, parcel numbers, transfer codes. And a column labeled Adjustment Fee. "What am I looking at?" Barry tapped a line near the top. "These are property boundary adjustments Sylvia filed with the county recorder's office going back 2 years. They were submitted using her personal notary stamp and a former board member's login credentials. The issue is, these adjustments were never approved by the board or voted on by the HOA." "That's forgery," I said. "And fraud," Barry added. "She submitted 5 of these adjustments on properties that were eventually fined for encroachments, including yours." I leaned in. "You're telling me she redrew property lines, then fined people based on the lines she made up," he nodded, "and collected the fines into a separate account. Not the HOA's main fund, a private one." I stared at the screen. "That's criminal conspiracy. That's racketeering." Barry opened a drawer and pulled out a printed email thread between Sylvia and the former treasurer. The emails detailed instructions on how to reprocess certain fines by routing them through a third-party contractor, WCE Consulting, which didn't have a phone number, website, or any employees. Just a P.O. box. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Barry picked up his phone. "I already called the county district attorney. They're building a case. Over the next 2 weeks, investigators from the DA's office subpoenaed HOA financial records, digging through every transaction linked to WCE Consulting. What they found stunned even the seasoned auditors. Over $50,000 in adjustment fees had been funneled into the fake contractor's account. That money had then been withdrawn in cash installments under the signature of Sylvia Thompson. The withdrawals were spaced apart just enough to avoid federal reporting thresholds. One withdrawal had a receipt with Sylvia's initials next to a memo line that read Community Beautification. The DA's office issued a warrant for her arrest. She was picked up at a motel 3 towns over, where she'd been staying under a different name. When police entered the room, she was shredding documents. Among them were property maps with her handwritten notes, fine amounts, and what looked like resident profiles notes on who had disputed, complied, or pushed back. The news broke hard. Every local station picked it up. Even a regional outlet ran a headline: HOA president charged in boundary fraud scheme. The footage showed Sylvia being led out of the motel in handcuffs. I got a call from the DA's office the next day. "We'd like you to testify," the assistant district attorney said. "Your case helped uncover the larger pattern. Without your documentation, we wouldn't have had the foundation." I agreed. Not out of revenge, not even out of pride. Just because I knew what it felt like to be on the receiving end of unchecked power, and I didn't want anyone else to go through it. When the court date arrived, the courtroom was packed. Not just with residents, but media, legal interns, and even a few curious realtors trying to gauge how bad the PR would be for Willow Creek Estates. Sylvia appeared thinner, her hair tied back, dressed in a dull gray suit. She didn't look defiant anymore. Just worn, the state laid everything out: forged property adjustments, illegal fines, misappropriated funds, and fraudulent business filings. They showed how she manipulated plat records to extend common areas into adjoining private lots, then used those falsified boundaries to justify fining homeowners. I took the stand. I described the fence incident in detail, backed by my footage and copies of the permit documents. The prosecutor asked if I'd ever received notice or any formal hearing before the attempted removal. "No," I said. "They showed up with tools and tried to tear it down without a shred of legal authority." The jury didn't take long. Sylvia was found guilty on 6 counts: conspiracy to commit fraud, falsifying public records, theft by deception, unlawful surveillance, criminal impersonation, and destruction of private property. Her cousin, the IT guy, took a plea deal and testified against her in exchange for probation and a fine. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 3. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and the individual residents affected, including me. I received a check in the mail 1 month later, $50,000. Exactly what I'd sued for, now backed by a criminal judgment. Barry called me again shortly after. The board voted to dissolve the old compliance committee entirely, he said. We're replacing it with a homeowner mediation council. No fines. Just peer review and recommendations. That's a better system, I said. We're also drafting a bylaw amendment. No board member can serve more than 2 consecutive years, and no one gets exclusive access to financial accounts anymore. Triple sign-off required. I exhaled. Took a lot to get here. Yeah, Barry said, but we got here. That weekend, the neighborhood threw a block party, not the kind with political speeches or HOA announcements, just music, food trucks, and kids running around with chalk and scooters. The woman who used to get fined for her garden gnomes had set up a lemonade stand. Markle was on the grill flipping burgers with tongs like he was auditioning for a cooking show. I stood near the back, sipping a soda, when Mrs. Landry walked up beside me. You know, she said, I used to dread opening my mailbox. Every week it was a new complaint: paint too faded, bushes too tall, gnome too whimsical. I laughed. Well, the gnome's safe now, she nodded, and so are we. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the street. Sprinklers clicked on in the distance. Somewhere a dog barked. Kids laughed. It felt like the neighborhood had finally exhaled. A few weeks later, I patched and painted the last section of my fence, the spot they'd tried to rip out that started it all. I added a small brass plate to it. Nothing fancy, just engraved words: stand your ground, know the law, build it right. No one's touched it since.